Oh, no way. It's only a few more days until these spoilers come out. You know what? I better turn up my volume all the way just so that I get the notifications. Don't want to miss these. Yeah, that's probably good enough. Wait, so what they're saying is tap it that, save that to block, then Arsenal this one, and then this one. What the hell? Oh my god. Oh, right. That means there's a new spoiler out. Sweet. Let's take a look. All right, it's Team Covenant. Let's see what they got. I love these guys.
Is this a warrior helmet? It looks so good in cold foil.
Oh. It's a warrior helmet. I don't have to buy Arcanite Skullcap. I get to keep my arms and legs. I don't have to buy Arcanite Skullcap. Ah! Sorry about that, friends. I got a little excited there seeing that spoiler come in from Team Covenant. But that Helm of Sharp Eye coming in as a possible option for the Warrior helmet slot is just great. And it's going to save me a ton of money because I still don't have Arcanite Skullcap. Now, it's not quite as good, but I think it's definitely a viable option in the Warrior class. So while we're on the topic of Warrior things, I thought I'd share my Warrior Blitz deck that I built and retuned a number of times that eventually won my first cold foil in a skirmish event. Let me start by stating that this video is likely more suited for beginner to intermediate players, but anybody that's looking for a viable budget option to expand their Blitz arsenal might find something valuable here. Keep in mind that I'm a relatively new player and I only jumped into my first event 3 months ago. I am by no means a pro or competitive level player. I'm just here to share tips and building strategy that were effective for me. Also, I'm fully aware that this is not going to be the only Thea Blitz deck tech on YouTube. Red Zone Rogue, Hometown TCG, Ravewen, and Dice Commando all have great Dorinthea deck tech videos, and they were super helpful to me when I first started, so shout out to their channels. Go check them out. One of the reasons I really wanted to do my own was to keep budget in mind, and also keep up with the current meta as we go into the Everfest season. With that being said, let's talk about Dorinthea, the queen of budget Blitz. I'm going to have 6 sections in this video, so feel free to skip around as you like, and I'll have them posted up on the screen as to what we're going to go over. Section 1, why build Dorinthea? Why build Dorinthea? Because she's awesome. Moving on to section 2.
Whoa there.
Fine, I guess I'll give real reasons. Dorinthea is a very accessible and easy to learn yet difficult to master hero. As someone who was brand new to the game only 5 months ago, I can say that Dorinthea has a very adaptive learning curve that translated well with my general game knowledge. What I mean to say is that there is a thriving relationship between learning Dorinthea and evolving as a player. Also, Dorinthea can teach some more advanced non-mechanic related strategy, such as avoiding predictability and learning baiting and bluffing techniques that are crucial in the higher levels of play. Lastly, and this was the most important for me, she is very budget friendly. The deck that I won 2 cold foil prizes at 2 separate events was under $60. Thea has been one of the few heroes that can get away without equipping legendary cards without being severely disadvantaged by it. Section 2, the equipment. So let's talk about our equipment options. Part of what got me excited to share this video was the spoiler of Helm of the Sharp Eye. Prior to that Everfest reveal, the helmet slot was an awkward and difficult place for a budget player. But now, we don't have too much to worry about. Since I still don't have an Arcanite Skullcap to run myself, I usually run either the Ironrot Helm or the Hope Merchant's Hood. Now the Hope Merchant's Hood is a good way to get out of some bad hands. It still doesn't provide any defense. The tougher matchups where I'm going to be taking damage, I'll probably just use the Ironrot Helm. Although Skullcap will remain the best headpiece for Dorinthea, the Helm of Sharp Eye is definitely a viable option, and at its worst, it's just an Ironrot Helm, and at its best, it's card advantage. And it does pair really, really well with cards like Stroke of Foresight and Sink Below. So I'm actually looking forward to running. Also, for anybody wondering, the LSS judges did confirm that there's a replacement effect wording for doubling the weapon's power, so it does work with those cards like Stroke of Foresight. Now the chest is where you want to put most of your focus. Wait, that came out wrong. The chess piece is where you'd want to put most of your budget if you have, you know, the funds to put into the deck. Now, there are a couple of substitutions here. You can actually throw your opponent off by playing something like Hardened Crosstrap in Dorinthea and coming up, never knowing when you're going to follow up with an attack action. But I would say with this card floating around in the groups for around $30, it's not as hard to obtain, and it's worth spending the money, especially when the rest of the cards in the deck aren't going to be that expensive. The Courage of Bladehold does work. I mean, plain and simple. It blocks for a ton. Its effect is going to give you a gigantic wide turn. I love this card. And really, it's at 1/3 of the cost of most legendaries. And let's be honest, when the Courage of Bladehold pops off, even your veteran players, their sweat glands are going to be going, because everybody knows that this card does work. You'll definitely be turning the tempo of the match when you pull it off, and we'll get to that in the strategy section. Now, I know that I said this was a budget build and I'm showing a legendary card. Well, guess what? The Brayford Bracers are a great card, but they are expensive, and I was just lucky enough to pull one. What I found in its place before I got this was Gallantry Gold. Despite its name, Gallantry Gold only costs a few pennies, and it does a good job defending. In addition, it really gives you a nice go wide turn, so it's definitely a good replacement, and I ran it up until I ran the Bracers only maybe my last event. To be truly honest, I probably only activated the Braveforge Bracers maybe a number of 2 times, especially in Blitz. So the value that you get out of it versus the cost of the Bracers, honestly, if I didn't pull them, I probably wouldn't have bought them. The one benefit though is that the Bracers are a huge defensive equipment with that Battle-Worn 2 defense, so you do have to consider that. Moving on to the legs, and here's where you're in luck. One of the best pieces that was ever printed for a warrior were the Refraction Bolters. This common powerhouse is one of the best options for leg equipment. Now, there is a legendary, the Valiant Dynamo, but it really doesn't fit this playstyle, so this is an automatic win. Now, I treat this card as more of a get out of jail free card. You really have to time that use when you really need it. Sometimes your opponent doesn't even see it coming. Like if you just have like an open resource, they're kind of waiting more for a reaction than they are for you to break these. And I'll briefly touch on it, but one of the best places to slot your Arcane Barrier is going to be the Helm spot. Just because, like I said, it's kind of an awkward place, so that's where I put my Arcane Barrier. And last but not least, that sexy Dawnblade. This is what the deck revolves around. Canonly so, Dorinthea and the Dawnblade were just destined to be together. And while I definitely have future plans to build Axe Dorinthea with some of the things I saw from Everfest, for now, let's not separate Dorinthea and her trusty blade. Once this baby gets momentum, it's really hard to slow down, and it might already be too late. So that's my standard equipment loadout for Dorinthea. In review, the warrior class has a defensive capability rivaled probably only by that of the Guardian. That, and combined with the fact that the equipment itself isn't as detrimental if you don't have the right pieces, especially in a budget build, I give Dorinthea's equipment a solid 5 out of 5 pepperonis. So let's talk about the build. There are a couple considerations to think about when building Dorinthea. I think there is still some room for defensive style builds within Blitz, but I really don't think that the hybrid playstyle has a great chance, at least not right now. So for me, I kind of stick with the pure aggro build. And if you hear those words, hybrid usually just means that you have the attack actions in addition to the standard Dawnblade strategy. And the pure usually refers to attacking with the weapon, attack reactions, mostly just revolving around Dawnblade. So here is my pure aggro build for Dorinthea Blitz. Giving a quick look at the curve, I run 13 blues, 20 reds, and 7 yellow cards. That's a pretty standard breakdown. Those numbers are kind of where you want to be with Dorinthea. I find running anywhere from 12 to 14 blues is pretty effective. Kind of staying around that 20 reds. You kind of want to be aggressive, and it does have a low cost curve, so that's kind of where you want to be at. Now, starting with our non-attack actions, I run a full set of Warrior's Valor. Big surprise, I know. This card has always done work in the warrior decks. It's really self-explanatory. It gives your weapon a buff and threatens on hit to give it a go again. Your opponent really needs to think carefully how they blocked in these situations. Then I have 4 hit and run. I'm running blue and red. These cards are great, even the blue, mostly just because you're getting a free cost go again. And I also like that it usually is never a dead card. So in the event that you had a hand that had 2 of these, you know, you could swing in, get that go again, and then buff the next weapon with the other one, so you really don't ever have a dead card when you have, you know, a go again source and then a hit and run. I just love this card, it's great. Now, I do have a Spoils of War in here, and I actually only have one. I've been trying to get another one for a long time now. Now, when I first started, this is not a budget card, I'll just throw that out there. But when I first started, I was running Driving Blade, and I was doing just fine with that. Then I have 2 Sharpened Steel Reds. They're a great card, you know, extra power for 0 cost. You're really turning one of your cards into 3 damage with this, and anytime that you can do that is usually a good thing. I don't see any reason not to run these, but I only run the red. Iron Song Determination, because Dominate in Dorinthea is absolutely savage, and it pairs amazing with the next 2 cards, which is Steel Blade Supremacy. A good thing to note too with the both of these is they give the weapon a buff for the turn. So if you have a wider turn on these, they get completely out of hand. Anytime you get card advantage in Flesh and Blood on your attack phase, on your action phase, you're in a good place. Steel Blade Supremacy is a wonderful card, and if you do end up getting them paired together, it's chaos for the opponent. Then I have 3 Dauntless. Now, I would say if anything, this is the most questionable slot in my deck. The reason that I particularly run them was because I was running into a lot of Ira and a lot of Guardian, and it forces your opponent, especially for Ira with all the flick flacks, it forces them to pay 1 for the flick flack, which is awkward, and it is really good in that regard. I mean, it's not as powerful against the Guardian usually because their reactions are expensive to begin with, but I think what I'm probably going to do though is I'm going to at least take the blue out, because I do not run Steel Blade Shunts in this build, and they're also good against Ira, which, like I said, I've been playing against, and with Viscerai going around, I think that they're just good in general. I've been getting hit a lot with weapons, so I'm probably going to put Steel Blade Shunt in for the blue spot. But if you had something else that you'd want to run, these are an easy replacement depending on what you play against. Last card I have here is Push Forward, just a one of, because it is situational, but every time I've used this thing, it's been great. The second attack, getting that Dominate and a buff is a guaranteed Dom Blade counter, so anytime that you're actually able to get this pulled off, the benefits are there, and I love that card for that purpose. You don't really need to bluff reactions when you're swinging for 6 with Dominate. All right, next up we have attack reactions. So now I have a pretty even 50-50 split on attack actions and reactions, and we're gonna get into why that is a little bit later. But starting out with my personal favorite, I have Iron Song Response. We have 4 of them. I run the blue and the red. Blue is a great resource, and honestly, your opponents are going to be blocking out blue the same as they are the red, you know, so you're going to get that extra card if they decide to block either way. So a +1 is honestly a really good point because it's breakpoint on a lot of defenses, and a lot of times it's just as valuable. So definitely running the blue on that, and the resource that it provides is also great. Then I have Stroke of Foresight. This is a great card. It's a great reaction, +3 to your weapon attack. I only run the red version, and it's going to be a great card to combo with that new helm coming out. Even without the new helm, it's still a great card to fix your hand up, and I think it's a good reaction. Then I have 3 Overpower. The blue, I would say, is more effective than the red for the most part, mostly because it's a resource, and then when it comes up in late game, the +4 is nice. These are definitely a flex spot in my deck, but when you do get them to go off and you do like 9 damage on a swing, it is pretty cool. This is the more of the tall strategy versus the wide strategy. Then I run 3 Out for Blood. I like the blue Out for Blood a lot. The fact that you get that +3 or +1 going on that breakpoint is great, and then the reprise effect, which buffs the second attack, because ideally you want to be able to play these to overpower that defense, get that second hit, you know, and have that go again to swing with Dom Blade again, and then you have that second swing on a breakpoint with this card. It's a good strategy. Now on to the heavy hitters, and then we start out with Singing Steel Blade. This card is irreplaceable. I mean, it's a blank canvas. You're pushing breakpoint on the reaction, then you're searching out the best card in your deck. I mean, it's always the best situational card when you need it, and it's irreplaceable. Up next, we have the most, I would say, synergistic card with Singing Steelblade, and that's Glint the Quicksilver. Fantastic card. Again, another staple. This card was actually pretty expensive up until, I don't know, a couple months ago. But now it's pretty budget friendly, and it's one of the best reactions within the deck. Anytime you draw a card in Flesh and Blood, you're in a good place. This card does just that. Also, it's a blue card that you can just pitch early on and then grab with Singing Steelblade when you need it. So you really can't go wrong. Then I do run one of Twinning Blade. Now this is a very situational card, but how I've treated it so far is basically when you're in that position where your opponent blocks out to prevent that additional attack, you play the Twinning Blade. As long as you have a guaranteed go again, then you're going to get a second swing in. So I do like Twinning Blade. The only problem is that if you do get blocked out, the Dawn Blade has to hit twice to get its counter. So it's not perfect, and honestly trying to go for a turn with 3 attacks is tricky. I've done it maybe once. It was awesome, but yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing to pull off. Now we have the coup de grace, so to say. I only run one route. I only use this as a finisher, and I'll explain why later. It's been the Warrior's Bane. It's been around forever, you know, and it's route. So it's always going to be a solid card, but it is a little expensive and awkward to play off. But when your opponent has like 2 life left, they block with an expensive defense reaction and you put it back in their hand and they cry. I mean, you know how it goes. Lastly, I do run one attack, and that is Nourishing Emptiness. Now, I was lucky enough to pull this out of Monarch when I opened a few of those packs. It's a fantastic card, but it's not necessarily a budget. I know you're like,
you said it's going to be a budget build, then you show us all the expensive cards.
We'll get there. There are plenty of replacements that I have found. I have a section that goes over prioritizing the upgrades of the deck. This is one of them, but it's not the requirement. It wasn't in the original deck, and we'll talk about that later. So let's talk about overall synergy here in the build. Now, when you're building Dorinthea, the first thing you have to keep in mind is to be effective with the Dawn Blade, you need Go Again. You need sources of Go Again. I have 14 on-card Go Again effects in this deck, and then if you count the Bolters, and then the Singing Steelblade can search out your glints, and you have like more tutoring capabilities. You actually have a little bit more, but you got to keep that in mind. I mean, like I said, at least 14. Yeah, I think I found that to be a great place to be, where you're not overdrawing them, but you don't want to be in a position where you have the pressure going and then you run out of that Go Again. So on the screen, I'll separate out into basically what I would consider the primer, you know, the pieces that I would not replace out of this deck. But you know, this video is not set in stone for anybody, and it's just to give you a good idea of overall what to build and how to start with Dorinthea. You know, and of course, all the changes that you can make that you find better, you know, go for it. That's the whole point. You know, experiment and have fun. And you know, check out the section on replacements in the later part of the video. Then we have the section on strategy. Here I'll cover some of the things that were most effective to me when playing this deck. Keep in mind, like I said, I'm kind of a newer player and I'm not a pro. So if you come in here and say, you kind of, you know, you didn't really explain that in the best way, hey, that's what the comment section is for. Teach the community something if you're a pro Dorinthea player. I'm all for it. So my first tip here is actually understanding how Dorinthea works, because as a new player, I was totally confused by this, and I'm sure that some other people were too. So let's just read her ability. Dorinthea's hero ability states, once per turn, when a weapon you control hits, you may attack an additional time with that weapon this turn. So a couple things to know. First off, and this is really just semantics, but I kind of wish that said if a weapon you control hits, you may attack an additional time instead of when, because I'm just so used to seeing in this game we use the word if it hits, and I almost read that ability as if it were a different meaning, and it really doesn't. And this is really important because this is how your opponents are actually reading that ability. They see if it hits, and they're really going to try to prevent that. And secondly, for its confusion, you can't just land a hit with the Dawn Blade and then smoothly slide on into the second attack. Doesn't work like that. No, you need Go Again. So I think in a combination of the way that the text reads and then the fact that it's a little misleading, like on the original print, I even think it says, yeah, so on the original card, it does say that you need the action point, you need that Go Again to actually do that. So there's a reason it's outlined there. People obviously were, you know, a little confused by how this interaction worked. So yeah, keep in mind, once that first attack is fully defended out, you're done, that's it. With the exception of something like Twinning Blade, I mean, that chain is done. So So let's add everything up and take a look at the conditions that are needed to meet a double Dawnblade turn, which is really what you're going for here. 1, you need to land that first hit with the Dawnblade. If it's fully defended, you're done. That combat chain is over with, and unless you have an attack action card to play, there's really nothing else that you can do once the Dawnblade is completely blocked. 2, you need either an additional action point or go again on your weapon in order to set up for the next swing. 3, you'll likely need a resource to power up the Dawnblade and the actual resource to pay for these things in order to set up these attacks. Lastly, just looking at the Dawnblade itself, once you get that counter on there, it is easy to lose if people block you out, but the counter on the Dawnblade is extremely powerful. You're way above curve of the game by dealing more than 3 damage per card, so it's a really powerful effect. Just keep in mind, once you do no damage with a Dawnblade, you lose the counter. That first hit is really important. That's kind of what you need to play around, and that goes into my next topic. My second tip here isn't even related to specific cards, but more so how you play them. I call this one, keep them guessing. Basically, you want to remain as hard to predict as possible. Thea is a hero that can go either wide or tall, and you really want your opponent to not know exactly which one you're going for. So here's a perfect example of this. I have 2 Warrior's Valor in hand, a red Sharpened Steel, and a blue Dauntless. Now, I could be crazy here and just, pitch the blue, play the Warrior's Valor out, play the Sharpened Steel, and threaten this gigantic swing on the Dawnblade. And sometimes that is the right play, but realistically, that's just wasting one of my sources of go again, and it's a really easy to read attack, and your opponent's probably just going to block with everything they have. Now, of course, this is situationally dependent and hero dependent, things like that, but ideally, what I would do in this situation would instead be to play the 1 yellow Warrior's Valor, like so, play the Sharpened Steel, and push forward on that. So after I played these cards and I have swung the Dawnblade, I'm presenting, a relatively large power attack. I think it's for 8 here. And then I have a resource floating and a card in hand. And if your opponent knows anything about Dorinthea and what Dorinthea does, they're probably going to expect this to be a reaction. So at the absolute worst, if they see your bluff, they're going to block for just what they need, and they have to block 8, which is kind of awkward, right? And at the best, they're going to overcommit on that block, and you effectively wasted a card from their hand, putting them in a really awkward position. And now you have a red Warrior's Valor to put in your arsenal and be ready for the next turn. Yeah, I mean, that's really how I would run that. That's kind of how Dorinthea works, and you're able to use that baiting and that bluffing to your advantage, especially if you're playing, at turns where you don't have anything like this and it's all reactions, and turns where you're setting up, and then turns where you're setting up and playing reactions. They really have no idea what's going on, and you really want to be hard to read when you're doing that. My third tip is to stay the course. Dorinthea is going to try to be on offense as often as possible. She's going to go. Maybe not so much as like a hero like Dash, but for the most part, she's on the gas the entire time. Don't be afraid to race almost any opponent in Blitz, because Dorinthea can usually pull it off. The other thing is that there's absolutely nothing wrong with blocking, and this is just a general tip in Flesh and Blood overall, is that blocking is so important. Don't look at blocking as you wasted a hand. Anytime you prevent 3 damage, it's just as good as dealing damage, and that's kind of how you have to look at it. So don't look like it as I wasted these cards to block. Blocking is super effective, and Warrior has access to pretty much all 3 blocks. I think every single card in this deck blocks for 3. Just don't be afraid to do it when you have to, but for the most part, stay on the offense. So tip number 4, you want your ideal turns to be when you have the ability to buff the Dawnblade, give it go again, and then do something else. Dorinthea has this ability to always have an answer in combat ready, and that's exactly how you want your opponents to feel, even if you don't. We've talked about this before, but even simple things like just not choreographing your actions and being very deliberate and confident with your choices. Read your cards, formulate a plan, and deliver it in style, even if it sucks. You'd be surprised how much a little confidence will take you in this game. Getting a bit more into specific card strategy, there are a few tasty pairings in this armory. The one that immediately comes to mind is Glint the Quicksilver and Singing Steel Blade. So let's have a look. So let's say you're in your attack and your opponent blocks for just enough. You play Singing Steel Blade. So now you've just hit breakpoint with your weapon attack, and you get to search out a spicy reaction. And one of the ones I really like to pair with this is Clint the Quicksilver. So you're securing that go again here, and you know, this pair is really good, especially if you have maybe another reaction in hand that you desperately need to play but don't have a resource for. You know, drawing that extra card might be the resource that you need to play it. And honestly, this is that one play that I was talking about that your opponent is really fearing. So when you pull this off, you're really putting them in the defensive seat and keeping them guessing. Now, my only caveat here, don't automatically pick Clint the Quicksilver every time. It may not be the best choice, especially like they overblocked, great, you draw a card and nothing happens. You know what I mean? So like sometimes something like Iron Song Response, which I've grabbed many times off of Stinging Steel Blade, because now you're pushing that 4 extra damage over. So if they block twice, expecting a regular reaction, you play Stinging Steel Blade, get the +1, grab a red Iron Song, and now you got 4. So this is not an automatic pairing. You know, this card gets you the best reaction in your deck, so take time to think about what you're grabbing. Another one of my favorites is Steel Blade Supremacy and Iron Song Determination. Paired together, these cards are like Keanu Reeves and Robin Williams. They're just so nice, and they would complement each other all day. Basically, paired together, you're looking at 6 power Dawnblade swings that can grab you up to a 6-7 card hand, depending on what you have in Arsenal. And this is just absolute fear town for the opponent. I mean, maybe if playing against a really tall blocking deck, then you could run into some issues here, but for the most part, these are great pairing, and when you're playing against some of those top decks right now, like Viscerai, it's likely that you're going to be doing some serious damage if they're trying to set up for an OTK turn. So I love these together. And the last card that I want to take a closer look at is Route. So this is in an interesting spot. A lot of people may know how to play around it, especially if you have the floating resource or the number of cards that you have in your hand. But I want to say that I can't stress this enough, that this card should really be reserved as a finisher. Even if it's choreographed or your opponent kind of thinks it's coming, it could be extremely hard for them to deal with, especially in certain matchups like Guardians, who are playing heavy defense reactions like Staunch Response. I mean, as a finisher, this card is still really good. And I'm going to stress that. It's as a finisher. This is not a card that I want to use early on, because what you're essentially doing is forcing your opponent to kind of just keep a larger hand, and maybe that's not that big of a deal, but you're essentially just putting a card back into their hand. Yes, you get the extra damage, but usually not worth it. Early on, I'd rather just pitch this, get an extra Downblade attack or something, or maybe block out a hand, and then pitch this just to swing once and, you know, wait for another turn. And I think that about wraps up our strategy section. Now, like I said, I apologize if I didn't give you some pro advice and you don't win every single event that you go to. That's not really what this is for. I will say, I know that I didn't get too much into matchup specific strategy, and that was kind of on purpose. I really just wanted this video to build a foundation for you, to get you out to play, have fun, you know, kind of go out with a general idea of what you're going to be doing. And then in addition to that, the meta is constantly changing. I mean, honestly, just 2 months ago, every single video on YouTube was like how to play a deck against the Briar. You know, and now that's not the case. So I really didn't want to just make something too specific. You know, somebody who comes down and watches this a few months from now says, well, that doesn't really matter anymore. This is really just a foundation. But I could give some basic tips on the matchups just in a general stance. And that's if you're playing heroes that are very defensive, like Oldhim and Bravo, who are going to have those sort of really tall defense reactions, you're going to kind of want to try to play as wide as you possibly can, because it's kind of hard for them to deal with that. And then if you're going to play against a hero that can block really wide, like an Ira, Katsu, those sort of heroes, then, you know, your strategy might be to go really tall and actually spend, like I mentioned, not using 2 Warriors Valors. And honestly, that might be a situation where you would use the 2 Warriors Valors. So, you know, like I said, it depends on how they play. You know, I'm not going to go too into it, but that's just a general tip. And the best piece of advice that I can give is just play the game. Jump on a Discord if you have Tabletop Simulator, or maybe another way to play like that, or just going out, you know, just go out and play it. The best way to learn all this stuff is going to be by player experience, and there's really no replacing that. Alright, in this last section we'll talk about budget substitutions and prioritizing your upgrades. So even though the original deck list can be done for $50 to $70, I cannot stress enough that if your starting point isn't just at that place, that there's nothing wrong with that, and that there are definitely even more budget viable options in building this deck, and that's what I wanted to take a quick minute to show you. Basically, the first time that I built this deck, it was pretty much a commoner deck, and I didn't even have all the specializations. That was the first event that I went to, and I won 2 games just because I kind of paid attention to what I had and I made the best use of it. And that's exactly what Flesh and Blood is about. So talking about super saver substitutions, say that 3 times fast. We'll start off with Spoils of War. Now, Spoils of War is a fantastic card and it fits right into the deck. I didn't have Spoils of War when I started. I had Driving Blade, and there's nothing wrong with that. And Driving Blade does cost an additional resource, but it costs 1/100th of the price. You could do the math and say, hey, I'll save a few pennies, see if I like the deck before I commit to that kind of a purchase. Now, another relatively non-budget card that I brought up within the build section was Nourishing Emptiness. It's a great fit in both Wizard and Dorinthea. Again, I didn't have this in the first 4 or 5 times that I played this deck, in live events, and I found something that actually acts as a great replacement for this. I found this undervalued gem from Arcane Rising. So it's going in and out of focus. Cadaverous Contraband. And Cadaverous Contraband says, if it hits, you may put a non-attack action from your graveyard on top of your deck. And it's got a 6 power, very similar to the Nourishing Emptiness. And this card is roughly 10-20 cents, and a great effect where you attack with the Dawn Blade, and maybe you have that go again. Maybe it doesn't hit, but now you have another thing that you could do. So you play Cadaverous Contraband, and then you put something like your Warrior's Valor back on top of your deck, ready to go for the next turn. I think that's a great card and a perfect substitution for a lot of the times where players like to play that 1 or 2 of extra attacks. And there are a few other substitutions here. Steelblade Shunt is a great card that you could put in if you're missing maybe some of the other pieces. You really can't go wrong with this card. It will put you in more of a defensive build, but it's a wonderful card, especially against the Guardians, Ira specifically, and Blitz if you're running into a lot of those. And Nature's Path Pilgrimage is another decent card. However, it's conditional, and I eventually took it out once I made a couple of the upgrades. Biting Blade, I never really played this card at all. Overpower is strictly better. And then to wrap this all up, I'm going to talk just real quickly on update prioritization. And what I mean by that is that when you do end up falling in love with the deck like I did, there's a couple of cards that I suggest upgrading first before you commit to the other ones. And I would say that the highest upgrade priority is going to be Dorinthea's specializations. And more specifically, Iron Song's not really a Dorinthea specialization, and neither is Glint, but nonetheless, these are the top priority of the deck. You basically need these to run at an optimal level, even in budget. And the great thing that I mentioned before was that most of these are relatively cheap. Get yourself, 2 of each on these. They're fantastic. They're always going to be good. And like I said, they're kind of budget friendly now. So that's a great thing. That would be my number 1 tier of things to upgrade. The second, of course, would be to get the Courage of Bladehold. I actually found a few times that this came by on like the marketplace or the Facebook groups for $30. It is fantastic, if not just for the defensive capability. It really enables some awesome and crazy plays. And then I would say some of the other cards like the Nourishing Emptiness and Spoils of War would sort of be in that third tier. Actually, I'll rephrase that. I would probably put Spoils into like the Dorinthea specializations, but just keep in mind that these go for about $10 right now, and you kind of need to. I still need another one, and that is about it. I really can't think of anything else off the top of my head here, as I wrote most of the script for this and then kind of went free play on the end. But yeah, I hope you had a great time. I am super excited for Everfest, and the one last thing that I will say is that if you liked this, I'm going to do another one, because I really want to build a Hatchet Dorinthea. We have a few Dorinthea players at the store, and I love her. I started on her, but I don't want to steal anybody's lady, so I feel like maybe by moving into the Axes where nobody else is doing that will kind of give me my own unique touch, and that's probably what will come next. And there are some powerful cards coming out for Axe Dorinthea that otherwise would have made the deck not so great, but now that I've seen them, I'm very excited. It looks like Warrior's Valor is coming out. That's how powerful some of these new cards in Everfest are going to be for an Axe build, or Hatchet build, I should say. So thanks for joining in. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. I hope you're having a great morning, afternoon, and evening. And don't forget, follow those warrior vibes, slay the day, and push forward, even if it means going through some crazy monsters to do it. You can do it. Have a good one.